The impromptu speech is a good opportunity to develop some quick thinking skills and being able to sort of pull your ideas together quickly and then sort of present a speech that is articulate and very much on point. And that's what today is about. That's what this particular lecture is about identifying and developing main points for your impromptu speech. And we're working within the realm of this artifact, this artificial situation of the impromptu speech. And you've got topics, I've given you topics to speak on. And that's because I want to sort of remove topic from your mental docket. But this form, this genre, this skill set is so useful in so many different types of professional settings. So if you would imagine like a Q&A session. So let's say you've done a presentation at your work, and then afterwards they've got a question. Well, how does this apply to the project that we're doing over in this other section of the business? Take a moment, think. I can see sort of 3 impacts, and let me talk through each one of those. All right, so that's taking your time and quickly composing some main points, some key ideas. And that's what we're going to be working on. And this is something that you're going to do throughout your speaking career. And that's what that impromptu is about being able to come up with main points quickly in those impromptu type settings. And I've said it in the past, and I'll continue to talk about it more in these lectures, but this is hugely beneficial in job interviews or in informational interviews or in client meetings, just where you're engaging in conversation, but you need to take a moment and really craft what that message is. That's what we're going to be thinking about today. So what I want to talk through is just the basic procedure for coming up with main points for this impromptu speech assignment. Talk through some potential prompts that you might use to help prime the mental pump and help you come up with main point ideas for your impromptu speech. And then I'm going to ask you at the end of this video to prep an impromptu speech. So let's go ahead and begin with the process of invention. When you decide on one of those impromptu prompts to select, you should look at it and decide on your position. Once again, I don't really care whether you argue for or against any one of those topics. They are written in a way that allows you to run in either direction. But they do, more often than not, ask you to make a decision, argue one side or the other. But so take a look at that and decide on your position. Which way do you want to argue? As you practice these, I would strongly encourage you to develop a speech arguing one side, and then flip, and then run the counter thesis. That's a good skill to have. Dissoi logoi, countervailing arguments, being able to argue both sides of the issue. But then once you've decided on your position, take a moment and then ask yourself, why is your thesis true? Why is it valid? And in doing this, I would like you to mumble to yourself. Not mumbling to yourself because that would be fun to make you look weird in public settings, but mumbling to yourself so that you can get through a whole bunch of topic or main point ideas in a short span of time. One of the issues I run into when people are trying to come up with impromptu speeches is they immediately start writing. Well, the problem is they might get locked into a bad main point. And since it's on paper, they stick with it. So just sort of talk to yourself, run through probably 10 potential issues, or 10 potential main points, responses to the question, why is my thesis true? And in doing so, your main points should be claims, not topics. Okay, so remember what we just talked about in terms of what a claim is. It is a reason that you want your audience to take as valid. And so I'm asking you to be coming up with main points that are claims and not topics. So let me show you what I mean by that. So one of the prompts is public speaking should be a requirement at every level of a K through 12 education. Once again, you decide which way you want to run with that, and then you would ask why that's true, mumble a few reasons to yourself, but what you don't want to have is main points that are 5th grade and high school English class. Now that may make sense to you. That may be evidence you want to get to in support of your claim, but those aren't claims, right? If said as a sentence, they don't make sense. Well, I do believe that public speaking should be a requirement at every level of K through 12 education. I agree. Oh, really? Do tell me, why is that? Because 5th grade and high school English class. That makes no sense as a sentence, and I'm not going to talk to you anymore. So what is happening there is you don't have a set of reasons. In this speech, what I really want you to work on is driving your thesis forward with discrete claims. So in response to this thesis, we could argue public speaking skills take a long time to nurture, and public speaking skills are important at every grade level. Now, those are reasons for supporting that thesis. At a very basic level, they're sentences, right? They have a subject and a verb. But they're speaking to more discrete reasons for why that thesis is true. In the next lecture, we're going to be talking about principles for arrangement and making sure that those claims relate back to that thesis statement. But right now, I just want to think about how do you come up with these claims. So if this is one example, we can take a look at another one. Maybe let's say you're at a city council meeting, or you're at a civic meeting where you're discussing a smoking ban, or anything that your city would move to do. So in the U.S., there are a number of cities that have citywide smoking bans, so you can't smoke in public places. So if the thesis was, my city should ban smoking in public places, and your two reasons were workers and children, those are topic areas. Those are probably good pieces of evidence that you want to use, but they're not really the claim that's going to drive that thesis forward. Something better might be a public smoking ban can improve public health, and other cities have implemented such bans. So we're talking to sort of why it's a good idea and why it's a feasible idea. But so you want to be thinking in terms of what are claims, what are reasons for supporting that thesis. Now, how do you come up with these? That's a key question here. Well, I would say there's a couple of questions or basic ideas that you can run through to help prime your mental pump. Here's some of these prompts. You could think in terms of division. What are the key parts or topics embedded in that thesis statement? Now, this we don't know before we get to your specific thesis statement, but I'll show you some examples here in a moment of how you could identify what are the key components in the topic. Or you could think in terms of short-term and long-term. What's going to happen right now, and then what's going to happen in 10 years in relationship to the thesis. Past, future. What happened in the past in relation to this thesis or this type of thesis? What's going to happen in the future? Is there going to be an increase or a decrease? So you're trying to just think in terms of very broad categories. In classical rhetoric, these would be some of the topoi that we would talk about. Sort of just general areas, lines of argument to help us figure out what we might want to argue. Cause-effect is another sort of good topoi that's been with us since antiquity and relates directly to the sort of stuff we would argue even today. So let me walk through each one of these with an example. So all of these are for the same thesis statement. So there's not one right set of claims for each thesis statement. It's whatever you can argue particularly well. Now, your burden as a speaker is to make sense and come up with reasons that work for your thesis and are clear for your audience. It's not the audience's job to figure out what you mean. It's your job to be clear for that audience. So if we just took the same thesis statement, online education will never replace traditional universities, and let's say we're arguing in favor of that. So if I looked at division, I could say online education is good at broadcasting information, but traditional universities are good at cultivating learning environments. Well, those are sort of different topics. Those are, those are just two different things. Broadcasting information, cultivating learning environments. This allows me to talk about sort of here's what online education can do, and here's what it can't do, and here's why they'll never replace online education. Short-term, long-term. Online education will initially challenge traditional universities, but these two things will eventually split into different entities. So I could argue that as a perfectly reasonable set of claims in relationship to that thesis. Past, future. Extension education found its relationship with traditional universities, so like mail order classes and older versions of online classes. And online education will in the future find a relationship with traditional universities. So again, those are two claims that make sense for the thesis. I got to still come up with the evidence, but they work. It's just a way of coming up with a whole range of possible argument lines for that thesis statement. Increase, decrease. There will be an increase in online. Initially, there will be an increase in online courses, but we probably won't see a significant decrease in traditional university courses. Okay, you need evidence to show that, but those are perfectly reasonable claims to make. And finally, cause-effect. Online education emerged because of a need for adult learning, post-undergraduate learning, and that adult learning will impact traditional universities in a very minimal way. Okay, so we're sort of looking at sort of stepping back and looking at the root cause for online education and how that root cause doesn't necessarily hit traditional learning, traditional universities. So these are just some of the options that you could use. But ultimately it comes down to decide on your position, and mumble to yourself, get some of these topics out, get some of these claims out. And as you're coming up with these claims, make sure that they are claims. They are reasons for supporting that thesis statement, and they're not merely topics that don't make sense when put together as a sentence. So what I want you to do right now is go to that list of impromptu topics, select one of those prompts, decide on your stance, decide whether or not if you're for or against this, and then draft up 2 claims.